We've been at war since 1973. We have won many victories, so we must be winning the war, right? I'm Dan Ringer, and we'll talk about the war on drugs right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
In 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower assembled a 5-member cabinet committee to stamp out narcotic addiction. In 1973, President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs. In 1984, First Lady Nancy Reagan told children to just say no. So how are we doing? My guests are attorneys L. Richard Walker, a senior litigator, and Katie J. Cimino. Both are with the Federal Public Defender's Office. Thank you, Katie, Richard, for being with us.
Thank you, Dan.
Good to be here.
When I thought about how to introduce you, you're both defense attorneys, federal public defenders.
Right.
And a lot of what you do relates to drug offenses, the war on drugs. So you are the bad guys.
What do you think about that?
Well, we don't really look at it that way, Dan.
Actually, you represent the defendants in criminal drug trials, and the reason I ask you to be here is because you have a unique perspective in society on the war on drugs, because people who are accused of drug crimes in the federal system will say and tell you things that they may say to no one else nor tell to anyone else, because what they tell you is privileged, an attorney-client privilege. So how's the war going?
Well, first I'll say that I wonder why it's characterized as a war. I mean, after all, precisely who is the enemy? What is the plan of action? What's our ultimate goal? Will it ever end? So I think it's interesting to discuss what kind of problem this is and how it should be approached. But to directly answer your question, if there's a war, I think most people can agree we're not making a lot of progress and we're not winning, so to speak.
Well, we're throwing an awful lot of resources at it.
That's right. We are probably spending as if it's a war, but of course it's a problem like any other problem that a country faces, and we need to find a workable solution. And I think the real question is the solution that's been in place for the last 20, 30, 40 years or perhaps longer, is it effective? What are the results?
Well, is it?
We are throwing a lot of money at it, Dan, I think, but I'm not sure that we are putting the money towards the most effective means to combat the so-called war. A lot of money in the budget is going to law enforcement and trying to win the war by arresting people. That's one aspect of winning the war, beating drugs.
Well, but the prosecutors and the police will tell you we're only arresting the lawbreakers. We're not arresting, I suppose, except with some exceptions, we're not arresting innocent people. We're not putting citizens to any problem. It's only the people who are breaking the law that we're singling out. We talked about how long this has been going on, though, and narcotic addiction goes way back to the first development, I suppose, of narcotics. The British fought the Opium War, or wars. So why aren't we winning? Why can't we clean this up?
It's still a very serious problem. We all know, and we see it every day in what we do, and you see it as well, that people continue to battle drug addiction, that there are new drugs that are now popular and that are difficult to deal with as a group. People are addicted, and we don't see, at least in what we do, great changes that have come about through the methods that have been employed to solve this problem. And I think one of the reasons that we are glad to be on the show is to talk about some of the ideas that we have and some of the problems that we've seen that might assist this process and may help people battle and deal with their addiction and reduce crime in our communities and allow this so-called war to be fought, so to speak, in a more effective and more intelligent way.
Well, where would we start? Katie, where would you start?
Well, I do believe that law enforcement is an important aspect of this war on drugs,
Yeah,
of course.
we probably should clarify. Nobody is here today to say the use of drugs is okay, that the war on drugs is a futile or wasted effort, although I think we have some doubts about how successful it's been. The idea is to try to understand what's going on here and maybe to make some proposals about how to lessen the problem or maybe resolve the problem. So I interrupted you. Where would you start?
Well, I think this problem is multifaceted. There are many layers to this. One place to possibly start is to try to have a proactive stance on the war against drugs rather than react to everything that's happening. And one place that might be a starting point is the schools, to start educating children about drugs. And that's where the Just Say No to Drugs campaign started.
Well, that was 1984. We've still got the problem.
Right. So I think that's just one place that might need that we might need to focus on, so that we're not treating people who end up with an addiction down the road. We're cutting it off before it even begins.
Is it possible to do that? Now, I had a child go through the public school system when the war on drugs, the Just Say No issues were being talked about. They had the DARE programs that stood for Drug Abuse Resistance Education, DARE. And I came away feeling pretty good about it, but as that group of kids got older, I ended up representing some of them in drug cases, and you all are representing some of them in drug cases. So it may have made a little bit of an impact when they were very young, but it seems like it wore off as they got older.
Well, I think it needs to be a continuing process. It needs to be in the schools. It needs to also be with the family unit and be addressed that way, so that kids are getting it from different angles and not just in the school system or not just at home, and needs to follow them so that they don't end up with an addiction at some point down the road. And if it does end up an addiction, and that's where we come in, if they've been arrested with some sort of drug offense, then there are treatment options, and there need to be treatment options before and possibly after prison that people can take advantage of to deal with their addiction problems.
I had a client one time who was involved in drugs, and I asked him how it got started, and he told me a tale of woe that involved a difficult childhood and familial problems and that sort of thing. But by the time I had seen him, he was just absolutely hopeless. I asked him, what will you do when you get out of prison? And he said that he just felt like there was nothing he could do, that there was no help for him to find a job, to do much more than perhaps find a place to live. He had nothing to look forward to, and so it was his assumption at the time, and he had been in and out of prison for the better part of 30 years. His assumption at the time was he would serve this sentence and he would go out and do something and then serve the next sentence after that too. So treatment programs before prison sound like a good idea, but what happens in prison? What happens after prison?
Well, there are, at least in the federal system, there are drug treatment programs that are offered to inmates. Now, not all inmates are eligible for those programs. Not all inmates take advantage of those programs. And I think most people may not understand is that the prison culture in many instances does not necessarily promote treatment. So even for someone who wants to be involved in a treatment program, it may be difficult for them to participate. And then there are other problems. Sometimes people are transferred for reasons beyond their control, and
From
therefore
one prison to
Sure,
another.
where a program may or may not be available. There's a long waiting list for these programs. So, it's easy to say, well, offer people drug treatment in prison, but sometimes the programs are not as effective as we would hope for them to be. And again, sometimes drug treatment programs in isolation are not the answer for someone. They may need actually more vocational training. They may need access to college courses. They may need other types of mental health treatment that may not be available in the prison system, or may not be available in conjunction with the drug treatment programs that do exist. So one proposal, in addition to education, which of course there are educational programs in our communities that help educate children about drugs and educate families about drug and the danger of drug abuse, we think that there should be an increased emphasis on treatment programs, rehabilitative programs in the prison system, so that while people are in prison, they can take advantage of that opportunity, and it should be a developmental opportunity for them. So that's, I think, the second component of really, it's a multifaceted problem. It's a complex problem. There has to be, unfortunately, a complex solution, and a solution that involves multiple parts. And one would be to hopefully increase the availability and the effectiveness of drug treatment programs and other rehabilitation programs that exist inside the prison. But it doesn't stop there. And we have other ideas, and we've seen other problems from our perspective, which, as you stated, was a unique perspective.
Let's go back to the beginning. Katie, you talked about educating, trying to head this off before it becomes a prison issue. And people talk about the warning signs that your kids are on drugs. And, in all honesty, I see these lists sometimes, and it sounds like the warning sign that your child is becoming a teenager. It's inattentive, lackadaisical, wants to sleep all the time. That's pretty much being a teenager. How do young people in particular get involved in drugs? Where does this start?
I think it can start in a number of places. For example, peer pressure is an obvious one when they fall into certain groups where maybe they feel pressured into trying out different types of drugs and experimenting with drugs. And that can start as experimental use, but then eventually lead to something more serious and a significant addiction in their life. That can be one way that they fall into drug abuse.
The drugs that we're talking about, people will say, well, when we're talking about kids and drug use, they think marijuana, we're using marijuana. And that's certainly pervasive in our society. It seems like it's everywhere. And it seems like everybody who is interested in it will find access to it without a great deal of trouble. But there are some other drugs that teenagers are using. They can be prescription drugs. They can be manufactured drugs like methamphetamines, crack, purchased drugs like cocaine that can be converted into crack, heroin, things like that. I've run into an awful lot of cases where it seems like that it starts in the family, that it's in some cases almost a family business.
Well, there is a generational component to drug abuse, drug use, drug dealing, drug-involved crime. There's no question about that. In fact, there are entire communities. They may not be communities that we're all aware of or that we all frequent, but some of us live there, and there are communities that the common denominator is drug use and drug abuse and the other terrible things that flow from a drug infestation. So these communities exist. And the question is, how can we help people in these communities? How can we help these communities help themselves? How can we provide resources? How can we give people, and we should, okay, I'm asking questions, but I'm happy to try to find answers. We need to develop effective ways, responsible ways, thoughtful ways to participate in these communities and to allow these communities to make changes. No good can come of drugs. I mean, whether it may seem as if it's innocent and recreational, but drugs, look, we see it. Drugs don't make you a better person. They don't help you develop. They don't make you better at what you do at your job or whatever it is you're interested in. They don't make you a better parent. They don't make you a better child. I mean, this is not a productive thing for anyone to do. And of course, even though, as you joke with us and you suggest that we're the bad guys, we're not in agreement with it. I think where we can help is we see this, and we might be able to add a different perspective to the discussion, and hopefully assist people and help them make changes.
You talked about prison culture working against being involved in drug treatment programs. Explain that. I don't understand that. What culture would tell you not to participate in a drug treatment program?
Well, of course, a lot of people who are in prison for one reason or another may not be in agreement with their sentence. They may not like where they are. They may not agree that the lifestyle that placed them in prison or that was a contributing factor to their sentence is a bad thing. And if you have, let's say, 10 inmates in a group who think that, well, I'd like to make some changes, and if they had an addiction problem, they'd like to try to work on that problem, but there are 3 of that 10 who sort of think it's a big joke and not something that's important. Those 3 can undermine the rehabilitative efforts and the good intentions of the other 7 in the group. Not everyone is there voluntarily. It's not you don't choose to go.
Very few people sign up to go to prison.
So you're going to have people who will want to work against the treatment efforts of others, and who may simply disagree with the whole process. So it's very difficult to participate in treatment programs in prison. Sometimes you can't even get into them, and like I said, sometimes you're transferred, or there may be a problem in the prison that could temporarily shut the program down.
For all these millions of dollars that we're putting into the war on drugs, we don't have enough resources in prison to actually try to help the people that are convicted of these things?
I think that's accurate. Given the waiting lists, for example, and given that not every prison has a comprehensive drug treatment program to offer, I think that would be a fair statement. I think what's going on here is we're allocating large amounts of resources, federal dollars, state dollars, toward the law enforcement side of this. We are allocating tremendous amounts of dollars to the prosecution side of it and to the sentencing side of it. It costs a lot of money to send someone to prison for 5, 10, 15 years, and probably not enough money on the rehabilitation side of it, and almost no money toward what we call the reentry component to this. And that's a very important point, because of course we know people are arrested, we know they're prosecuted, we know they're sentenced, but what happens next? What happens after they're released from prison? And our experience is, though there are a number of well-intentioned judges, defense lawyers, probation officers, even prosecutors who want individuals to develop after they release from prison, who want individuals to successfully integrate into the community and do well in life, and if they have an addiction problem, to improve that problem. But the tools are not there. The treatment programs, the counselors, the education programs, the individuals who may help an inmate find a job, those there are not enough people in the system to assist with that part of it. So what happens when people are released from prison? Well, while they're in prison, they're not aware of any meaningful reentry programs, so they don't start working on developing and improving themselves while they're in prison, perhaps. And when they're out, there's not a program that can meaningfully assist most inmates in order to help them integrate and find a job and get an apartment and live a drug-free life. So we need to put an emphasis on reentry. That's one thing that we've seen. If you look at the whole picture, you look at the entire war, the entire problem, I prefer to use that term, I think we see a lack of emphasis on the reentry side of this, on the back end.
I wonder though, what could we change that would make the reentry process easier? Most of these defendants, most of the convicted criminals that we have dealt with that go to prison because they are involved in the drug trade, come out of a situation where they got involved in the drug trade, or often because they really had no other choices. There was no other way to make a living. There was no other way to deal with the problems in their lives. Many people were simply hopeless and became addicted to drugs. Many had tried to find employment, tried to find some way to make a living. Selling drugs was easy and was readily available. So they get caught and they get sent to prison. And when we release them from prison, we send them right back to where they were to begin with. We give them treatment programs that say, well, you have to not do that, and you have to be aware of what you're getting into, and you have to not associate with those people. You have to not put yourself in those situations. But they still are hopeless. They're still unemployed. We're telling them to go out and get jobs when, frankly, if the three of us didn't have law licenses, stop and imagine what we'd be doing for a living now. Where would you work? If you lost your job, if you got laid off, what would you do next? So what kind of programs, what kind of reentry programs could we design for these people that would help them out?
Well, you just described something that sounds like almost the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and expecting different results, because that's what we're doing in a sense. Like you said, putting these people back into the same community, the same family, the same lack of a job, and expecting them not to reoffend. And that's unlikely to happen, I'd say. So some things that probably need to be focused on are getting people jobs, some jobs that can help stimulate the economy. And it is an easier choice probably to just go hustle on the street corner and make an easy buck, and that's why it's often the chosen path of some people with lack of an education is another something that needs to be focused on, so that people have possibilities and opportunities that they can look to find employment, rather than just being on the street corner dealing drugs.
Well, are we talking about programs, government-sponsored programs like, well, during the Depression there was the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, where people who couldn't find jobs would be given jobs doing governmental programs, building roads or parks or whatever the government decided needed to be built. Those would be jobs. Is that the kind of thing you're suggesting?
Well, I think here's where you start, Dan. In federal court, there are no officers who have the title a reentry officer. We have a lot of probation officers. We have other people who work in different capacities, but start by creating an infrastructure. Start by reallocating some resources from other parts of the process and appoint people who have the answers to these types of questions. We're not reentry people. We have some ideas. We may come up with our own sort of self-initiated programs to help some of our clients after they're released, and sometimes it works very well, especially if you have someone who's motivated. But you have to study the problem. You have to appoint people who know a little bit about this, and you have to give them the resources and the ability and the personnel and the facility and the staff to start putting this program in place and giving inmates who leave prison somewhere to go, somewhere to start. And I think what I would do if I was appointed to that position is I would start interfacing with other people in the community to see what's out there, who's willing to participate, who would be willing to employ people out of this program, what requirements would they have, what training would the individuals need through this program, a reentry program, in order for them to be qualified for different jobs. So we need to start by simply putting a piece of it in place, putting a program in place, and going from there. And right now, at least in federal court, that office, the Office of Reintegration, or the Office of some type of release office, doesn't exist.
No, the United States probation officers are doing that.
They help, and they try very hard to do that on their own. But that is not their focus. That is not their sole purpose to assist with helping people to get training and drug treatment. They don't have their own drug treatment center that they can say, well, you have a drug problem, you were in prison, you need help, but the program that was in the prison wasn't enough for you. Here, go 3 doors down to a drug treatment center that's set up right for us. It doesn't exist. It seems as if we have to struggle in the federal court system to find the available programs for people that will work. And we do it too on our own. But there should be an emphasis. There should be an operation that people from prison can go to where there's already something in place.
Yeah, I have talked with many probation officers in several different districts about this, and they all tell me basically the same thing.
Not
They
enough money.
are Not enough resources.
Not enough money, not enough people.
Hugely overworked. Right. I think they do a good job
Absolutely.
with regard to what they can do. Katie Semino, Richard Walker, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the LawWorks, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks show topics and additional information about this show's topic. If you would like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll find video of this program at thelawworks.org, and you can find previous programs on YouTube. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The LawWorks show, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a copy of this program for classroom use, please send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The LawWorks is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The LawWorks is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.